Hey, it's Jeremy from jeremy.net. So, I am continuing with my illustration from the environmental illustration class I took with John Messer. And in this piece, I was experimenting with using marker paper instead of vellum to draw out the illustration because I was working a little bit larger at, I think this is 11 by 14. And the vellum pads that I use when I do my comic book layouts, I'm using 8.5 by 11 pads, and it's pretty affordable. But vellum gets pretty pricey when you move out to 11 by 14 and other larger sizes. But the thing I found was that I didn't really enjoy working on this surface that much. Part of it was the fact that having the material taped down, the drawing taped to the drawing board. Part of it was the fact, I like to be able to rotate the drawing around as I work and work from different angles. And then part of it was just I wasn't able to see through it as well as I can see through the vellum. And for some reason, I couldn't find my light box. I ended up finding it a couple weeks later, buried in a closet somewhere because I've been using vellum so long. I wasn't able to find my big ass light box. But as you can see here, I switched back to the method that I use for most of my comic book work, where I'll do my rough drawings on vellum or whatever type paper, do corrections, and then print it out as a blue line drawing on cardstock. And I suppose I could have blown this up even larger and printed it out on a large sheet of Bristol. And I mainly didn't do that just because a lot of this, I figured keep the pieces small because I'm still doing comic book work while I was taking this class, and I didn't want to do a massive piece that would have ended up taking 40 hours. Now, this whole thing is an interesting experiment because I go back and forth between trying to be open to new ideas and experimenting and seeing what happens, but also trying to take the ideas that I've already learned from doing a lot of comic book work and seeing how those things translate to doing different types of illustration. So I stuck with the same method that I use where I begin with a holding line, trying to get the major shape of the whole thing, the massive silhouettes, in this case the large outline of the tree, and then slowly going in and drawing in all the details. And if you didn't watch my video on scale and perspective environments, the assignment was to draw a tree house. And so what I decided to do is draw a tree city. So just to catch you up, that's what you're looking at here. This is, instead of just a tree house, it's got these massive airships that are docked all around it to really give you a huge sense of scale. And then all of these trees are actually giant buildings and structures. So as I go in through here, adding windows, adding all the foliage. This piece was a huge exercise in patience and concentration, because it is very easy when you're doing a large piece that has a lot of details in it to fall into noodling as opposed to detail. I mean, detail is descriptive. You're saying something about the piece. You're describing it. You're giving additional information. You're fleshing out the world, as it were. Noodling is when you're just kind of putting lines in because this seems like the place to do it, or this feels like a cool line, or gives me an interesting texture. Things like interesting texture, stylistic things like that do have their place. But when your piece is entirely made up of noodling lines, it feels very empty. It's like eating a big sugar puff or something. It's like eating cotton candy. It might taste sweet, but it's really kind of empty. It doesn't have any underlying structure. And it really is difficult to make all of these details that you put in there say something and continue to support the overall structure of the drawing. It's like you have to have this sort of balance where you have to be relaxed enough to be patient and take your time and draw all of these things, yet engaged enough and aware enough to say, well, what does this piece say? What is this describing? How is this adding to the form? You don't want it to just become a mess. And I won't say that I was 100% successful in this piece. I freely admit that. I mean, like I said, I don't, as a rule, do a lot of hyper-detailed work, and I try to stick with doing illustrations and ideas that just concentrate on large forms and putting in only as much detail as necessary to communicate the concept. In this particular illustration, because it's a city, if I don't put all of the detail in there that I'm putting in there, then it just looks like a tree. You're like, well, why does that tree have a small window in it? So it really kind of required going there and trying to add all of these different little levels to it, tiny little elevators, suggestions of people walking around, suggestions of human structure. I end up putting a little wagon train that goes around the trunk of the tree towards the end here. And I will say that in places I definitely feel like I descended into noodling a little bit. And that might just be me being hypercritical, but I think it's one of those things where even people who do a lot of hyper detailed work, people that do stuff like, say, a Philip Tan in comic books or Jim Lee, that style of artwork, they've been doing it so long that they understand the balance of putting detail in the right places. So even though you look at a whole piece and yeah, this feels hyper detailed, it's selective. And I still feel like there were places where I blew it out and put in too much detail in areas where it didn't need it, and then probably some areas where it probably needed a little bit more detail, or that detail needed to be more expressive, really specifically describing something as opposed to just lines. And I think I did decently for not having done like hyper detailed ink work in a while. I mean, it depends. It's all a matter of perspective. Some people might look at my comic book work and feel that it's very detailed. I look at it and I feel like it's very, very loose and stripped down, like almost Jack Kirby in terms of its simplicity. Not that I am, let's not compare myself to Jack Kirby, but just in the fact that Kirby's work tends to be very stripped down, bare bones. It's all about the energy of the storytelling. That's more of what I go for, as opposed to an awesome splash page with all sorts of rendered light flares and speckles and spectacle and belt buckles and all that crazy shit. But yeah, it was a good experiment, and I think I will probably do more experiments in the future. That's it for now. You can check out my website, jeremy.net. That's GERIMI.net. That's where you can buy my comic books and artwork. You can also sign up for my free weekly newsletter to get a behind-the-scenes look at my creative process, updates on new comic books and artwork releases, and upcoming comic book convention appearances. Okay, go be creative.